Well, well, well. I'm back again. And I'm holding in my hands the letters that you all have written to the station asking Mr. Katsimatidis to remove me, threats of coming down here and removing me yourself, and all other types of negative behavior. But even though you feel that way, you won't change that dial. You haven't changed that dial in 6 months since we started doing the left versus the right, and you won't start now, particularly when you find out who our guest is today. He's the one and the only, accorded all kinds of gratitude and awards in radio, on walkie-talkies, any other place that you could hear him. And I'm talking about the one and the only.
Tin cans with string
Tin
strung up
cans
between
with
them.
strings, master James Flippin. James, thanks for coming back today.
Well, Governor Patterson, it's very nice to be back and nice of you to invite me back, despite the fact that I was one of the people writing those emails to John Katsimatidis saying, get this guy out of here.
So I want to start by trying to be magnanimous, James.
Oh, okay.
You know I am a Democrat.
That's true.
I was the chair of the Democratic Party in New York. I was a Democratic governor of the state. But I want to say that there's no subject I'd want to talk about today more than just the brilliance of President Trump and how he has set the whole peacekeeping virtue in nature in the Middle East, the way he has dealt with Israel when they started to go a little overboard, the way he has threatened Hamas and other organizations when they've gone overboard. And then here he is, we understand starting Monday, the hostages will start to be released. I ask you, Ronald Reagan, he really set the communists straight when he was in office. Mm-hmm. I will say that. Lyndon Johnson, he really was the civil rights leader after Kennedy. Kennedy was being careful. Johnson was from the South. He knew how to talk to the people down there. He did a great job. You know, President Roosevelt had 4 terms and helped us win World War II. I don't see any of those accomplishments comparing with what this president has done 8 months into office.
Yeah. Well, look, it's lofty praise for the president, Governor Patterson. I obviously agree with the virtue of heaping that praise on President Trump at this point, because it's the kind of thing that people said you can't do, that you can't accomplish, that will not be accomplished. I think back even a couple months now to the airstrike on Iran, when that whole saber rattling was at its peak, and President Trump took a decisive step in dropping those bunker buster bombs, and that really diffused that situation. This is a historic moment. This is a historic peace deal that secured President Trump's legacy beyond this lifetime. And that's what I think you're talking about right now, Governor Patterson. More importantly, though, because it's what you're getting at, it goes so much deeper than just political legacy and how we'll remember people. And these are real lives. This is real, active war zone type stuff that the president is using the power of the office to stop and to overcome. Hasn't happened yet with Ukraine and Russia. We probably both thought that would be the quicker one to potentially get solved.
Sure.
And in this case, you just have to hope that this hostage deal and the ceasefire and the various aspects of it are going to come to fruition. It really feels like a historic watershed moment. I can only imagine how much trepidation and uncertainty there is between both people in Gaza and people in Israel as far as what's going to happen. Could this really actually be the moment that we've been waiting for? But there's hope. There's optimism. There's a sense that maybe this could actually lead to some sort of protracted peace. And that's something that throughout the Biden administration following the attacks on October 7th just really never felt like an actual realistic possibility.
They sat back and watched. They were spectators. You know, they said things and they condemned activity, but to be a world leader, which you are automatically one when you're president of the United States, President Biden just kind of, I guess he was waiting for someone else to come in and fix the problem.
I think that's the right way to say it, Governor, because I think that Biden was a guy who governed in a largely passive way, right? Like, he felt as though as long as he wasn't Trump, he was going to have some sort of positive legacy that backed him up. And he continuously tried to say, well, the MAGA Republicans are the downfall of society. The MAGA Republicans are the worst thing to ever happen to democracy. The MAGA Republicans. Well, from where I'm sitting, the MAGA Republican himself, President Trump, has been one of the most positive forces for peace over the last 10 years. You had a complete grind to a halt during the first Trump White House, this whole concept of you're always going to have some new war that gets started when a new president comes in. You know, dating back as far as I can certainly remember, and I was born in the mid-'80s, you basically had some new war that would pop off with a new White House. And that didn't happen under Trump. Unfortunately, during the Biden administration, and you could probably more effectively blame the Russia-Ukraine situation on him than you really could the Israeli Hamas thing, because that had been going on for so long. But I think the key thing here is exactly what you're talking about, Governor. President Trump is a guy who understands relationships, who understands leverage, who understands the right time and place to put some of that pressure on individual people. No matter what side you're on, you hear it. Oh, Israel controls America. This is an instance where the outsized influence that Israel has on congressional lawmakers and presidents and all this is really working against a potential peace deal. But Trump has a relationship with Bibi Netanyahu. He has clearly, maybe behind the scenes at times, told him how it's going to go and how it's not going to go. And by exerting some of that influence and some of that pressure, that's how we got to this point. Because you make a good point, Governor Patterson. The Biden White House was more or less saying, well, there's not a whole lot we can do.
I'd say the message right now is there's a new sheriff in town.
Mm-hmm.
And he acted like one. And I'll say this, James. This is early in the settlement. Anytime you mention Hamas, the next phrase can't be that positive because nobody trusts them. But even if this were to blow up and they turn around and attack Israel again or something like that, I would be the last person to blame him for taking the steps he took.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. I think that the process up until this point has been fairly masterful in the way that Trump has dealt with it. He initially said, look, I'm going to authorize Israel to go in there and more or less flatten Gaza, turn the strip into a parking lot. We're going to rebuild it. It's going to be the MAGA Gaza Strip with a golf course and all this kind of stuff, making people's heads pop off and explode. And then you also had some months after that, Trump basically saying in public comments, I've seen some of the photos from the Gaza Strip. I think the word genocide could be fair, or maybe some, I don't know if that's exactly how he said it, but he's always allowing a little bit of oxygen for both sides.
Right.
And that's what's key in a negotiation. That's what's key in a compromise. We used to learn about that kind of stuff as kids in school, civics and deal making, and this whole idea of you got to give to get. That's no longer part of our political lexicon because we're so dyed in the wool and so hardline about our politics. But to make a deal, you got to give, you got to get.
Now, this period where you learned this, if I'm not correct, you said you were born in the 80s?
That's correct.
James, I was already in prison by then.
Well, it was the crack epidemic after all. Exactly. No, but seriously, we did learn about the Great Compromise. You know what I mean? And we would hear things about how congressional lawmakers would have to figure out that they're going to give up this to be able to get this. And now we're amidst this government shutdown where, in essence, it just goes to show you how pathetic the federal government really is and how useless it really is.
And, you know, even during the time that it was happening, when President Reagan would get together with Tip O'Neill and a couple of cigars and a glass of scotch, and all of a sudden all the problems went away.
Right.
they would play that out on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
People really liked that whole idea. But, of course, Saturday Night Live is theater. But in reality, when do you think it really changed where Republicans and Democrats are just totally distrustful of each other?
It's a good question. I think, Governor Patterson, and you opened the door for me to give my opinion on it, so I'll do so. I think that the problem is the American left, the progressive movement, so to speak, already won. You referenced LBJ and the civil rights era.
Right.
It happened. The 60s happened. We went through it. The sort of the reciprocity, or whatever the word is I'm looking for, the kind of shock waves that came out of that eventually led to the gay rights movement, eventually led to increasing aspects of feminism and more rights for women and single moms. And we've had a lot of progressive activity over the last 50 years, let's say. And there's an unwillingness from the political left to accept that. Because once you accept that progress, it means fewer book deals. It means fewer professorships. It means less research dollars going into how racist and hateful this country is and how evil it is and all this kind of stuff. So you need to go more and more and more extreme. So you see a guy like Senator Chuck Schumer, who once upon a time, going back to the 90s, let's say, was a guy who was known as someone who could make compromise.
A moderate Democrat.
And write out legislative deals and build coalitions and stuff. That's a guy who now is so afraid of the Marxist left and is so convinced that a member of the Marxist left is going to kick him out of office, despite the fact that he's basically ancient and should be sizing up a retirement home. He's desperate to stay in. And he realizes that the only way to do that is to capitulate to the farthest left influences. So let's not forget, 54 Republicans have consistently said, let's keep the federal government running. Let's do it. We're happy to do it. Well, let's keep the government open. We'll continue to negotiate the finer points of some of these other spending bills and go for it. But there's 6 Democrats that you need to have vote along with that package. Schumer and his Senate leadership have said, do not do that. We will not allow you to do that. That's why it's the Schumer shutdown. And it's all because the farthest reaches of the left continue to poison the political discourse. And frankly, you also have an unwillingness from the powers that be to just let it happen. So Bernie Sanders was kept out as the nominee, even though he was supposed to be in 2016. You probably should have had it be Bernie again in 2020. That was stopped so that it could be Biden. And in essence, you're seeing this groundswell of passionate belief from people on the political left who really truly believe in Marxism and communism and abolishing private property rights. They think that's really good, even if it's really only in their mind, because they don't want to give up all their own stuff. So that's where you come down, is that you've got this really far left power center for politics that kind of calls the shots in Hollywood and schools and popular culture. And there's an unwillingness or an inability of anyone in the so-called political class to really fight against that.
So I agree with what you've said. And now I want to bring a scenario because I wonder how you would react to this. I think that if a prominent Democrat, I have to be careful because I could be including myself here.
Yeah. You're going to get someone's going to volunteer you, Governor Patterson.
If a Democrat who has, a generally good standing among other Democrats got up and really started fighting these far out ideas, and I'm not talking about LGBT rights or whatever it is,
right?
But this.
Maybe someone who stood up and said, you know what, I do think ICE should be eliminating the illegal immigrant community from these various cities and basically saying, get out. If you want to come back legally, that's fine. But something along those lines, like if you made a statement like that.
If someone said something like that, I think they would be lionized. Because I think there are a lot of people who vote Democratic because they were born that way, like me, and they will just kind of follow whatever the leadership is offering, when the leadership is actually almost rolling out the red carpet for change that would be more to the right. And, what I did when I was a legislator was I remember that I became the floor leader for the Democrats. And it was my first day. And the Republicans, had all these bills we voted against. And finally, they had this last bill. I thought, I could live with that. So I got up and I said, since on my first day, my Republican colleagues have treated me with the utmost respect, I am going to vote for the bill because I just want you to know I may not agree with everything, but I'm not here to try to shoot down everything you say. I didn't get 2 steps out of that chamber. I thought I was going to be lynched. It was going to be the first lynching of a black man in like 100 years.
Yeah.
Because my colleagues didn't get it.
Yeah.
And what I said to them was, listen, if we need to go make a deal with them, if I go over there, they'll listen to me.
Yeah.
If you go over there, you won't even get through the door.
Well, it's such a good point, Governor Patterson, because I think that if you think about what got us here, right, you have to remember that first President Trump had to fight against the Republicans. Let's not forget that once upon a time, there was the Never Trump movement, and it was going to be Jeb Bush, or it was going to be Ted Cruz, or it was going to be Marco Rubio, or it was going to be any number of, and talk about radio, I remember very well when the late, great Rush Limbaugh and even our own Mark Levin were sort of in that Never Trump camp because they were so concerned that guy can't win, that guy can't win, that guy's not a serious candidate, that guy
James,
doesn't have what it takes.
I would listen to both of them. I didn't remember that as well as you do.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, again, we're talking 2015, 2014, whatever. It was that run up to that election. Eventually they got in line. They were never supporting like a Hillary Clinton over President Trump. But in the primary season, they had their feelings. And the problem is guts and politics very rarely meet. They very rarely mix. Having actual guts is not something you typically see in a lot of politicians because then you're talking about once you get past this whole idea of, oh, I hate Trump so much, or I hate Hillary Clinton and Obama so much. Once you get past that stuff, it's a battle of ideas, not personalities.
Now,
and that's hard.
The example that I gave you, years later, I become lieutenant governor, and then one day, in a matter of an hour, I find out I'm going to be governor. And a gentleman who appears on this station often, I'll get to who he is in a moment, was on one of the TV stations, and he says, oh, yeah, now we got Spitzer out of there. Another week we'll have this other guy out. And the Republican majority leader of the Senate, Joe Bruno, he was the highest-ranking Republican in the country, called this person and told him, you are not going to bother Governor Patterson on my watch. Mm-hmm. And the other person said, I thought you were a Republican leader. He said, no, I'm a leader, then I'm a Republican. And the individual who did that agreed to get together with me, and it began a friendship. And the individual who changed his whole tune was Roger Stone.
Wow.
Roger Stone did that.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Now, so while the audience tries to recover from what I just said, it is the truth. He'll tell you it's the truth. And he and I get along quite famously since then. And we'll come back and talk about some of that. But right now, we have some sponsors, and they have granted us this time. And we are going to grant them the opportunity to do a little advertising. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. We're with James Flippin. Call your friends. Tell them he's on. And I'm David Patterson. You don't have to call your friends. We'll be right back. We're back on the left versus the right. We're revealing secrets here today. We're just taking on everything as it comes. And I'm with my frequent co-host, James Flippin. I don't know how you do all this work around here and still manage to take out the time to spend an hour with a has-been governor like me.
Well, I would never use the term has-been,
Okay.
governor. Although I have often said, former governor, former congressman. I was on with owner-operator John Katsimatidis the other day doing the morning show, filling in for Sid. I guess it was on Yom Kippur. And I said, joining us now, former Congressman Peter King. And John said, I don't like former. I don't want you to say former. And just Congressman. And I said, okay, sorry about that. So, we say Governor David Patterson, although not the current governor, and that's okay. But yeah, in terms of the current politics, Governor Patterson, we were talking about it last segment. I really think that the best thing that could possibly happen for the political left, and we're talking about it in sort of hypothetical terms.
Yes.
I don't know who that person's going to be. They need to have their Trump. And that might sound like leading language or loaded language. I don't necessarily mean somebody who's got the same personality. I don't necessarily mean somebody who's got the same bravado or the same approach, but someone who can disengage the typical politics, how it's always been done, and get back into the mix with some sort of more populist idea.
Something like some sort of facsimile of Bill Clinton.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much true. I think that Bill Clinton was a guy, and if you think about the most successful Democrats of my lifetime, it's easily a guy like Bill Clinton because he seemed to understand that you have to connect with the everyday American, right? You have to have some level of your platform and policy that ties back to the average person who went and voted for you on any given day. And although the political discourse has attempted, for example, to paint Trump as a guy who, in the midst of this government shutdown, wants to just give more money to his billionaire donors, and the rich idea of there's so many big cigar-puffing Republicans in boardrooms and all this kind of stuff, that's not really the face of the party right now. And the whole concept of a government shutdown, how much does that really mean to the average person? I mean, if you're flying, you've been dealing with some of these increased delays because the air traffic controllers are increasingly calling out sick. And of course, the political right tends to have a lot of military members within its ranks. So the lack of a paycheck is going to start to hurt, and that's going to start to put some pressure. But for the most part, federal government workers are Democrats, and they're the ones that are getting screwed by this, being put in furlough, missing out on paychecks, maybe entirely because the back pay question is going to start to come into play. You could also see some government programs that get cut as a result of a protracted government shutdown. So I really think that you need somebody who's going to say, you know what, this whole idea of vilifying Trump, vilifying the Republicans, making it out as though there's only one way. Who's this woman, Katie Porter, out in California, who ended an interview suddenly because she was asked about how she's going to appeal to the 40% of Californians that voted for Trump. And she just got no time for that interview. She stormed off because how dare you ask her that? That's not going to win. That's not going to be a success at the national level.
Why is that a difficult question to answer?
She said that the woman was being contentious or something like that the woman was being antagonistic by asking her that.
This is just like an opportunity for me to talk about things. I liked contentious interviews because I always found that under pressure, I would not think about what I had maybe memorized or thought about for the interview.
Yeah.
I would think about how I feel.
Right.
And to me, that just shows a lack of self-confidence. You're a prominent figure. You're being interviewed in an interview that's going to be heard a lot of places, and you go and do something like that. I mean, if she had used foul language, called her a nasty name that women are usually referred to as, then that would have been totally understandable.
Yeah.
But to just do that, I mean, you ran away from a fight.
Yeah. Well, again, that's why I say, Governor Patterson, to me, the idea of guts and being in politics, courage, strength of your conviction, it's pretty rare. I think a lot of the time it's just people who want to say the right thing in order to get elected or avoid a controversy, not have to answer that question from a reporter, whatever it may be. You see that with a Kamala Harris. She's always so sort of measured and trying to tie it back to the talking point. And, for a Katie Porter, I think that's her name anyway, out there in California, you never face any of that friction. You never face any of that scrutiny. It's always favorable media. It's always the favorable young college kids. It's always the fawning interview with some Hollywood celebrity or whatever it may be. So you don't ever have to go up against that. So the concept of anybody saying, well, how are you going to build a coalition? It's like, well, how dare you ask me that? Don't you know only good, virtuous people vote for Democrats? You want me to speak to those unwashed ruffians on the right? I mean, that's not something I'm willing to do. And when you do that, that's what I mean. You need to get away from this whole idea of there's only purity or fairness or upside or honor in the one side politically. Even if you believe that, in order to be an effective politician, you have to go beyond that. You can't just be a dyed-in-the-wool ideologue, commentator, point of opinion in order to be a politician. It's a job that goes beyond that.
I remember, I feel like I'm going down memory lane, but I remember that when I was the Democratic leader of the Senate, this is before I become governor, and the Republicans wanted to do something the next day, and my guys wanted to go home. So they said, we're going to adjourn until tomorrow. I put my hand up. I said, would it be possible? Because we have a lot of members here. It's a Thursday night. That's a big night in politics. They want to go home. Could we just lay this over until next Monday when we come back? No, we can't do that. And I said, well, I think we can do that. And the other senator saying no. Now, Senator Bruno is sitting right there. I said, you know what? I'll bet if you ask Senator Bruno, he will adjourn until next week. There's this quiet. No one says anything.
Yeah.
And then the guy gets back up and he says, Mr. President, I move that we adjourn until next week. And we had so much fun laughing at that. We actually beat them on one little thing, and it wasn't even a bill or a declaration. It was when the next session was going to be. But when when my colleagues, of course, we had drinks after that.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't know who even went home. but the point is that they said, wow, how would you think of that? I said, because there have been so many times I've let him do things I didn't really want to do. And I needed to win back, that I have a voice there.
Yeah.
And by doing that, he gave me that voice.
Sure.
And I don't know why it is, not just in government, but even in business sometimes, James, that people don't take a different approach than just hammering their opponents over and over again.
Well, look, far be it for me to really truly have the answer to that, because I think that's almost a question, as you aptly said, Governor Patterson. It's not just politics. That's something that we've seen in almost every walk of life. This belligerence, this unwillingness to really even properly explain your position or try to stand behind your position. It's my way or the highway, and then kind of maybe a tantrum might result. I think you can probably blame that on some of the more modern parenting techniques, maybe, where it seems like there's an unwillingness to tell kids, no,
right,
you can't do that. Why? Because I said so. When you deal with that type of thing as a younger person, and you're dealing with an authority figure and trying to come up with clever ways to respond to objections and come around this, and, well, maybe if I rake the leaves, they'll let me go ride my bike tonight. That's the kind of stuff that leads to negotiation and compromise further down the road, and kind of what you're talking about. I don't know exactly how we get back to that point as a society, but it's a really good point. Like, you're talking about understanding the relationship, the leverage, the touch point. You'd had past negotiations with the Senator Bruno coalition and said, oh, I know this is a place where I can say almost silently, like a no-look pass, this is one that I need to get.
Let me tell you, I liked him so much, and I at a certain point, he got indicted over something. It never really seemed to go anywhere. But I called him up and I said, is there anything I could do? He said, that Italian restaurant was somewhere, I'd just like to go there with you. We could just sit and have some wine, blah, blah, blah. But I'm the governor. I can't go there. It's, governor sits down with indicted majority leader.
Right.
Couldn't do it.
Right.
And apparently he hit the ceiling. He told the chair of the Independence Party, all these people, mad he was at me. And he had a significant other who he'd been with for years. And she did a lot of real estate. So I called her up and I said, listen, I think he's mad at me. She goes, yeah, he's really mad at you. I said, I have an idea. You have a lot of real estate, so you must have an empty house somewhere in Albany, right? She said, yeah. I said, why don't you take him to that house, order out or cook, and I'll come over. So we did it. And I said, and by the way, you answer the door because the state police are the biggest gossips in Albany.
Yeah.
I don't want them to see anything.
Yeah,
So we have the dinner, and I say goodbye to him. He hugs me. He gets me to forgive him for being mad at him. I'm going out the door, and, of course, she's standing in the doorway with me, and I said, oh, and by the way, when the media writes that I'm having a relationship with your girlfriend, I hope you'll speak up to me, But you have to have a sense of who you are,
right,
and a respect for who other people are and what they have to do.
Yeah.
So that brings me to this question. What would you tell the Republicans in Washington right now? They are literally sitting pretty in this situation, and even though it might not have been intended, there are a lot of things the president can do right now that would be a lot harder if the shutdown never happened.
I think that it's an overarching theme of our discussion right now. You need to figure out a way to break the logjam and overcome the way things have always been. So, for example, right, maybe you're losing the game the way it's always been played if you're going to continue to try to negotiate directly with a Senator Schumer. Right. What I think you need to do is find some younger, potentially Democratic senators who you can go to them and say, look, what do you want to accomplish here? Obviously, we can't give you the healthcare for illegals thing. So what's something we can do that, as far as a negotiated thing to make you guys look good so you can get some gravitas with your voting base, we can get back to this negotiated point where we're going to have a continuing resolution for spending. What is something we can give you guys to get you to come across the line? And I don't exactly know what that is. Would it be some sort of a proclamation dictating when and how National Guard members can be used with the deportation process? Is there something where maybe you can agree to put some money in this continuing resolution behind classes for people where English is a second language? Or, can you do something to grant some grace to the immigrant community so that it doesn't feel as though you're totally losing amidst this nationwide deportation push, which I understand is something they really feel the pressure on politically. So I think the answer is you need to try to form some new wave of, again, compromise. What are you going to give to get? Now, it's easier said than done.
Now, by the way, I didn't think of this. This is your idea. But what I would say is, in doing so, you might even go and get some of your newer members to go to talk to the other side. Because they're all going to be here when we leave.
Yeah. Like how many meetings, I'll put it to you this way, Governor Patterson, and this is something sort of like more specific, but it's the kind of thing I'm talking about. How many meetings have a J.D. Vance and an AOC had about this ongoing situation?
Oh, I heard they get together for breakfast every Saturday.
Now, that would be sort of an outrageous thing, right?
Yes,
like,
right.
You could only picture that type of meeting with AI. And you could probably you could create that meeting with AI, and it would be very amusing, right?
Right.
But my point is, these are the people that are going to be the standard bearers for their party,
Down
arguably,
the road.
for the next, 20, 30 years, maybe?
Right.
They're the new Pelosi's. They're the new Schumers. They're the new Bidens and Clintons and Trumps and all this kind of stuff. So they need to figure out a way to break the logjam and make government work for the people again. Because it doesn't necessarily do anything for any of us to have these people just stomping their feet saying, we're actually going to close the whole thing down. We're going to turn the lights off. We're going to send these workers home, tell them they can't come to work. Nobody wants that. That's not doing anything for anybody. Now, in a roundabout way, and this is, I think, what you were sort of referring to, Governor Patterson, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'm actually disagreeing with you a little bit on this. If this shutdown rolls on and goes further and further and further, eventually Trump is going to make some major gains in doing so. What I mean by that is he's going to just start firing these people, laying people off. Government shutdown, we can't pay you. Bye. Here goes that program. Here goes that program. And you're not going to have the same recourse under a government shutdown that you would otherwise as Democrats.
And
so you got to count on these judges to continue to give you these injunctions, and it might not go your way.
That is certainly on the table from his point of view. He hasn't been overt about it, but he has certainly alluded to that's where he might go.
Yeah.
You know, by the way, when you were giving the example about J.D. Vance and AOC, AOC has disappointed me. Now, I'm sure.
As a Democrat, you mean?
Well, I'm going to get that in a second. I'm sure AOC has disappointed me, has come out of the mouths of millions of people. But when she first got elected and she, did the rounds and she was on Face the Nation and these other, New York One, that kind of thing, when they would, kind of give it to her, she had a way of kind of easing it out. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not getting all worked up.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. But she has changed. Just any little thing. And she's like in rapture. I mean, she's just antagonized. And that's when I think the process has gotten to you.
Yep.
That's when the leadership is failing.
It's also, you know what? I know we got to take a break, Governor Patterson. I have some thoughts on that. And as someone who has lived both before, during, and after, so to speak, the internet age, or I guess we're still amidst the internet age, I have a thought as to why that's happened for AOC.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back on The Left versus the Right after these important messages. We're back. And I know that those of you who were going to go to the refrigerator haven't done that. Those of you who wanted to use the restroom have eschewed that opportunity. And those of you who would just want to check your calendar didn't do it because we are awaiting the thought or thoughts of James Flippin as it affects the past, the present, and the future, particularly of the internet. That's quite a lead-in in terms of the breadth of the comments. But no, I think that AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is someone who really came to prominence through the sort of old school political process, right? She talked about that. It's part of her story. She knocked on doors. She walked around neighborhoods. She handed out flyers. She met people. She did it the old school way, pounding the pavement, so to speak. And she unexpectedly won that primary victory, and then that led to her being elected to Congress, and the story goes from there. But since that happened, she's become a major internet star, right? Yes.
It's not even just necessarily about the local politics and connecting with your constituents. It's her X, it's her TikTok, it's her Instagram, the YouTube. And that medium, that space, lends itself to the really extreme dyed-in-the-wool partisan politics. You don't necessarily gain a following or get a lot of views on your videos if you just say, well, we want to think about both sides here, folks, and we want to be open-minded, and we want to be – that doesn't move the needle. The stuff that moves the needle is coming on and saying, Donald Trump is a fascist. Donald Trump is a hateful guy. Donald Trump should be in prison. That's the kind of stuff that people say, whoa, okay, here's this fiery Latina who's got a lot to say about how much Donald Trump sucks. I like this woman. So that is where you have the difference between being an internet celebrity, a content creator, a star of the media world versus being a politician. And to really be an effective politician, yes, you need to maintain your media presence. Yes, you need to keep yourself at the front end of the news cycle, but it's not necessarily always about just saying the most outlandish thing that's going to get you the clicks and get you the views and grow your media profile. So we'll see. With an AOC, maybe if she really does have designs on running for Senate, if she does have designs on running for governor, running for president, maybe she'll have more of that kind of come to the center, less fiery type approach. We know that the House is where you have those types of people typically. And then as you kind of go into the more nationally focused offices, you typically tone the rhetoric down a little bit. Maybe not in 2025, but we sort of do hope so. But yeah, no, I think that in essence, there's the difference between what it takes to be an effective legislator, communicator, executive, politician versus someone that's a content creator online.
And I think that in the past, we Democrats, there was always one or two of the members in the state Senate, the Assembly, even the New York congressional delegation, not so much there, but who would go in conference with the Republicans, trying to use it as a tool to get more power in our party.
Right.
And this would annoy us to no end.
Sure.
And then what our Republican colleagues would do, and I don't blame them, but they do this, they'd get up and glorify these people. You all should pay attention to Senator so-and-so and Senator the other person. They really care about New York. They really have their finger on the pulse of the state, and you just had to sit there and take it.
Yeah.
But the point was that that it's much easier to be critical and act like the Republicans were hatched from a spaceship that came from another planet.
That's true.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas there are ways, in spite of the decorum and in spite of the acrimony, to be heard on points. And I just don't think that too many of the current legislators and even House and Senate members ever want to exploit that. When I say exploit that, what I mean is to demonstrate that you can be reached verbally and also that you can be heard.
Yeah. Well, it's the difference, I think, between what we said. There's the firebrand nature of politics, and then there's the people that really truly show the guts to say, yes, I have the strength of my convictions, but in order to make some progress here, we have to kind of break the mold and then redo it. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of guts, again, to do that. But if you don't mind, Governor Patterson, I know we're in our kind of, final minutes of the program, so to speak, and
we're in the lightning round.
Exactly, we're in the lightning round, and we haven't done a lot with the mayor's race.
Oh,
now I just think it would be a shame for me to not just kind of say how much I think this whole Mamdani situation is completely ridiculous, just an absolute disgrace when you think about the fact that this guy is supposedly the front runner for being New York City mayor. Let's just talk about some basic facts about Zohran Mamdani, some things that I think a lot of people know, but maybe they sort of forget. This is a guy who has rich parents who are Bollywood directors, millionaires, yet he lives in a rent-stabilized apartment in New York City. This is a guy who claims to be a socialist, who wants to rail against private property, who had a 3-day wedding bash in Uganda on a private compound. This is a guy who is a dual citizen.
He just got married this past summer.
Oh, yeah. He just got married. Yeah. This is a guy who is a dual citizen of the United States and Uganda, where it's basically illegal to be gay. And yet here in the birthplace of the gay rights movement, less than 50 years ago, you have this guy, Mamdani, who wants to be the mayor of New York City, where the birth of the gay rights movement continues to flourish. This is a guy who claims to be a Muslim who wants to make prostitution legal. I mean, this guy is such a disgrace, such a hypocritical
it's all over
joke
the place.
that it's absolutely disgraceful that just because he won the Democratic primary, he's supposedly going to be the next
mayor. And
mayor.
there's that picture of him with one of the antagonistic leaders of Uganda, who was totally against any form of homosexuality.
Why is he a citizen of Uganda, Governor Patterson? I mean, I know you can't necessarily answer that for him, but why is he continuing to be a citizen of Uganda when they're literally a hateful nation that has policies that are more or less completely in line with, like, apartheid? And this is a guy who's going to be the mayor of New York City?
You know, it's kind of interesting that I don't see how he would lose any ground if there was some condemnation from him about what goes on in Uganda.
Yeah, because he doesn't actually have any interest in condemning Uganda. He's a guy who probably thinks Uganda is great and who thinks America and New York City is white and Christian and hateful and bigoted. I mean, why does this guy even want to be mayor of New York City? Why? So he can just give take some money away from rich people and spread it around to other people that he considers more worthy of that?
Well,
I mean, what a disgrace.
He's a very articulate speaker. He
is he? I guess I've never really heard him talk that much.
He's
hasn't even campaigned. He barely even campaigned.
And he says things that are interesting. You know, when Adams got out of the race, you know, most other candidates would just say, "Well, good luck to the mayor." He said, "Well, now we have two candidates who've had different problems with women getting out of the race." And which was, you know, really a very nasty thing to say.
Right.
And I didn't even really know what he was referring to. But the point is, yes, everything is a mystery.
Well, Adams was accused of, I guess, that former sergeant with the NYPD. She said that he was in a relationship with her or whatever. There was some sort of, I think, a civil suit or something with that.
Yeah, that might have been it.
Whatever.
It didn't seem to go anywhere. But
it is what it is.
He used it for
And this, again, Mamdani on October 7th said, yes, I'd like to put out a statement. You know, it's terrible that Jews were attacked and a terrorist attack and babies killed and women raped and all, really, really bad. But let me tell you about the genocide that's continuing to go on. I mean, come on. This guy is completely disingenuous.
Yeah.
He's a textbook socialist, Marxist, leftist,
in fact,
total scumbag.
And
this is going to be the mayor of New York City?
A term, James, for that, because you see it so often. I mean, I remember the night that Martin Luther King was shot. Now, this is in the 60s. We were still anticipating your arrival then. But, you know, I turned on the radio, and they interviewed a senator from Mississippi whose name was Eastland. And this is what Eastland said. He said, listen, I'm sorry whenever anyone gets killed. But, you know, when you go around making trouble, that's what's going to happen. Period. He was done with this issue. It's this way of giving a little and taking a lot.
Right.
You know, he gave a little about what
7th.
happened to the Jews on October 7th, particularly in Israel. Then he takes it back by saying, but that's not really the important issue. The important issue is what went on in Palestine and other places.
You can take issue with Israel. You can take issue with the tactics of the IDF. You can say you don't like Bibi Netanyahu. You can say you don't like his war cabinet. You can say that you think the U.S. government gives too much money to Israel. You might not like the relationship between AIPAC and congressmen and all that. I have sympathy to that. I can hear all that out. But the problem is when you take an event like October 7th and attempt to justify it, you just take the mask off entirely. And you show that you are not some statesman to be listened to or appreciated or given any level of credibility. You're just a total hateful ideologue who looks at it like violence is justified if the means are justified, if the end is justified.
I ask you this. I was surprised that, because there haven't been that many polls since then, I was surprised that he didn't dip severely in the polls. That tells me that other types of activists are supporting him, and they don't really care what he says.
Well, it's true, but see, here's the problem, Governor Patterson, and this is something that I really started to notice in terms of when former Mayor Bill de Blasio was running for president, which was about 2 weeks' time leading into the 2020 election. I'm not even exaggerating. So he had this ill-fated campaign, and one of the events that he took part in was a forum in New York talking about BDS, boycott, divest, sanction. And that's one of the movements from the political left saying that basically Israel is a colonizer, apartheid, genocide type state, and that they should be in some way marginalized and punished for their position. And Bill de Blasio, to his credit, was like, well, I don't believe in BDS. We're a city that has a lot of Jewish people here. We tend to support Israel for the most part. Yes, I might have some exceptions or take issue with this, that, the other thing, and I want to see a two-state solution, whatever it was that he believed at the time. But that being said, I'm not going to go with the BDS. And I thought to myself, okay, well, that's something that at the very least should generate some level of support from New York in the national push to decide who's going to be the next. Didn't even register, didn't even make a peep. Because the problem is the majority of the people on the political left no longer feel a level of kinship with the Jewish people and their experience. And you date back to the Holocaust and the pogroms and you go, whatever, the struggle over the years. That doesn't identify with the political left. Why? Because Jews, for the most part, are white, and they also, or at least if they're Ashkenazi, and they also are relatively successful financially. So if you're relatively successful financially and you have any level of Caucasian status, the left hates you, period.
And that's really interesting because the left that we knew, that entered the civil rights movement,
right,
fought for people and that kind of thing, there were a lot of Jewish people.
And you've talked about that. You've mentioned that.
Oh, man. And they were very heroic, and of course, some of them got killed. But I don't know when this switch came to where the left now means pre-communism,
right,
as opposed to trying to help people or trying to.
Well, I don't mean to be a broken record by saying this, but I think it really comes out of that post-'60s period where there was no contrition, there was no admittal that progress was made, no ability to sort of move beyond the militant aspect of that civil
and
rights
I think,
movement.
Unfortunately, the death of Martin Luther King contributed to that.
I would agree.
Because he was a person.
And probably Malcolm X for the most part.
Yes, who would stand up to people when they talked about using violence in the civil rights
taking
movement.
it to the most extreme
Exactly.
place. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Governor Patterson, I know we're almost out of time. I just want to mention, I know that since we have John Sterling coming up next, I really just wanted to get this in there quickly. Yankees lose! The Yankees lose!
We better get out of the studio before he comes in here.
Not that our Mets did any better.
Exactly.
The Mets are a disgrace.
Well, James, thanks for joining me as always, and all of you listeners, we'll see you next week.